3 months after burying my husband, I sat alone in our bedroom at 2 hours in the morning, staring at the ivory envelope that had been haunting me from my jewelry box. The paper felt heavy between my trembling fingers, heavier than it should have been for something so thin. David had pressed it into my hands on our daughter Sarah's wedding day, his grip unusually firm, his eyes holding a desperation I'd never seen before. "Don't open this until I'm gone, Maggie," he had whispered urgently, glancing around to make sure no one could hear us. We were standing in the quiet hallway outside the bridal suite, the sounds of celebration echoing from the reception hall. "Promise me, not until I'm gone." I had promised, of course. After 38 years of marriage, I had gotten used to David's mysterious ways, his need to control every detail of our lives. But this felt different. His hands had been shaking, and for a moment, I saw fear flicker across his face before he composed himself and returned to the reception as if nothing had happened. Now, 3 months later, with David's funeral flowers long wilted and his side of the bed permanently cold, I finally had the courage to break that promise. The house felt impossibly quiet around me. Sarah lived across town with her new husband, Bobby. Emma was finishing her residency in Chicago, and I was learning what it meant to be truly alone for the first time since I was 26 years old. My fingers traced the elegant script of my name across the envelope's surface. David's handwriting was always so precise, so controlled, even facing whatever had driven him to write this letter. He had maintained that architectural perfectionism that defined everything he touched. The seal felt like it might crumble under the weight of time and grief, but it held firm until I finally gathered the courage to slip my finger beneath the flap. The envelope opened with a soft tear that seemed to echo through the silent room. Inside, I found several folded documents and a single sheet of David's personal stationery, the expensive kind he reserved for important business correspondence. My heart hammered against my ribs as I unfolded the letter, and the first line made my world tilt off its axis. "My dearest Maggie, by the time you read this, you'll know that I'm gone." I had to set the letter down, my vision blurring with sudden tears. David had written this knowing he was going to die. Somehow he had known, and he hadn't told me. For months, I had replayed our last conversations, searching for signs I might have missed, wondering if there had been symptoms of the heart attack that took him so suddenly. But this letter suggested something far more complex than a sudden medical emergency. Taking a shuddering breath, I picked up the letter again and continued reading. Each word felt like a revelation and a betrayal simultaneously. The man I thought I had known completely, the husband who had shared my bed and my life for nearly 4 decades, had been keeping secrets that would redefine everything I believed about our marriage. Before we start, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more powerful stories. As I read deeper into David's confession, I realized that the envelope didn't just contain his final words to me. It contained the key to understanding why our perfect marriage had felt so hollow in those final months. Why the man who once called me his partner had begun treating me like a stranger, and why our daughter's wedding day had felt more like a funeral for the life I thought we had built together. What I discovered in that letter would change everything. I thought I knew about love, sacrifice, and the devastating lengths we go to protect the people we cherish most. Looking back now, I can see how perfectly constructed our life together had been, like one of David's architectural masterpieces. Every detail carefully planned, every element serving both form and function. For 38 years, I had been the foundation that allowed David Chen to build his empire, and I had worn that role like a badge of honor. We met when I was 26, a bright-eyed elementary school teacher with dreams of changing young lives through literacy. David was 30, already making his mark at a prestigious architectural firm in downtown Seattle. He was confident, ambitious, and had this way of making me feel like I was the missing piece in his grand design for success. "You have this gift for making everything beautiful, Maggie," he would tell me during our courtship. "Imagine what we could create together." 6 months after our wedding, when David received his first major promotion, He sat me down in our tiny apartment kitchen and painted a picture of our future that took my breath away. "I'm going to build us an empire," he said, his eyes bright with possibility. "But I need you beside me, not just evenings and weekends. These next few years are crucial. What do you say we put your teaching on hold temporarily, just until I get established?" Temporarily stretched into forever. But I convinced myself it was a worthy sacrifice. As David's career soared, I became the perfect corporate wife. I could host a dinner party for 20 with 3 hours' notice, remember the names and interests of every client's spouse, and make David look like the successful family man that companies valued in their partners. Our home became a showpiece, a testament to David's design skills and my ability to maintain his vision. "You two are relationship goals," our friends would say enviously at dinner parties. 38 years, and you still look at each other like newlyweds. They saw David's protective hand on my back as he guided me through social events, his pride when he introduced me as his lovely wife, Maggie. They witnessed our seamless teamwork when entertaining, the way we could communicate with just a glance, across a crowded room. When Sarah was born, I threw myself into motherhood with the same dedication I had brought to being David's wife. 2 years later, Emma arrived, and our family felt complete. David provided beautifully for us, designing and building the dream home where we raised our girls. He was present for every major milestone, every school play and graduation. From the outside, we were the American dream personified. "Your father works so hard for this family," I would tell the girls when they complained about his long hours. "Everything he does is for us." And I believed it completely. When Sarah got engaged to Bobby last year, I felt such pride knowing we had raised 2 successful, confident daughters. Sarah was a marketing director at a tech company. Emma was completing her medical residency, and both had chosen wonderful partners who clearly adored them. The wedding planning had initially felt like the culmination of everything David and I had built together. Our eldest daughter marrying a good man from a respectable family in a ceremony that would reflect our values and success. I imagined walking down the aisle, arm in arm with David, both of us beaming with pride as we gave Sarah away together. "This is what we worked for all these years," I had told David one evening as we reviewed wedding plans. 2 beautiful daughters who know how to love and be loved. He had smiled and squeezed my hand, but there was something distant in his eyes that I attributed to the stress of wedding expenses. I had no idea that beneath the surface of our perfect life, cracks had already begun to form, threatening to bring down everything we had so carefully constructed together. The first crack in our perfect facade appeared on a Tuesday morning in January, exactly 6 months before Sarah's wedding. I was sitting at our kitchen island, surrounded by bridal magazines and wedding planning binders, feeling genuinely excited for the first time in months. David was reviewing blueprints for a new commercial project while sipping his morning coffee, and I thought it was the perfect moment to share some wonderful news. "David, honey," I said, barely able to contain my smile. "I just realized something. Beautiful. Sarah's wedding is June 15th, and our 38th anniversary is June 20th. We'll be celebrating love twice in 1 week." He didn't look up from his blueprints. "Mm-hmm," he murmured absently, making notes in the margins with his mechanical pencil. "I was thinking," I continued, flipping through a magazine to show him elegant anniversary celebration ideas. "Maybe we could plan a quiet dinner somewhere special after all the wedding chaos dies down. Just the 2 of us. Maybe that little French place where you proposed. Or we could even take a weekend trip to—" David's voice cut through my enthusiasm like a blade. He finally looked up, but his expression was impatient rather than loving. "We can't afford to be sentimental right now. Sarah's wedding costs are astronomical." I felt my smile falter. I wasn't talking about anything expensive, just a quiet dinner to celebrate. "Can't you see I'm stressed enough without you adding more obligations?" The sharpness in his tone made me physically recoil. This wasn't the David who used to surprise me with anniversary getaways, who once rearranged his entire schedule to recreate our first date on our 10th anniversary. I closed the magazine slowly, suddenly feeling foolish from my excitement. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to add pressure. I just thought, that's the problem, Maggie. You're not thinking about the bigger picture here. He returned to his blueprints, with a dismissive wave of his hand. We have a daughter getting married in 6 months. Every decision, every dollar has to be focused on making that perfect. Our anniversary can wait. That evening, while I was preparing dinner, I heard David on the phone in his study. His voice was low, almost conspiratorial, and something about his tone made me pause in the hallway to listen. The door was slightly ajar, and I could hear fragments of his conversation. No, she doesn't suspect anything, he was saying quietly. She's too busy playing mother of the bride to notice what's really going on. My heart started racing. Suspect what? What was really going on? I know it's hard, David continued, but it's better this way. She's happier focusing on the wedding. Details. It keeps her distracted. I pressed closer to the door, straining to hear more, but David's voice dropped even lower. All I could make out were occasional words. Timeline, arrangements, and when the time comes. When I heard his chair creak, signaling he was about to end the call, I quickly hurried back to the kitchen, my mind spinning with possibilities. Who was he talking to? What didn't I suspect? And why did he need to keep me distracted? Over dinner that night, I watched David carefully, searching for clues. He seemed normal, asking about my day, complimenting the salmon I'd prepared. But there was something different in his eyes when he looked at me, a distance that hadn't been there that morning. David, I said carefully, is everything okay with work? I mean, you seemed stressed today. Everything's fine, Maggie, he replied smoothly, cutting his fish with precise movements. Just the usual client pressures, nothing for you to worry about. But as I lay in bed that night, listening to David's even breathing beside me, I couldn't shake the feeling that something fundamental had shifted. The man who had once shared every detail of his day with me was now keeping secrets. And the loving husband who used to cherish our anniversaries had dismissed our 38th like it was an inconvenience. I convinced myself he was planning a surprise, that the mysterious phone call was about anniversary arrangements he wanted to keep secret. But deep down, a small voice whispered that something was terribly wrong. Over the following weeks, what started as isolated incidents began forming a disturbing pattern. David's dismissive behavior wasn't limited to anniversary talk. It was seeping into every aspect of our wedding planning and daily life. Each small rejection felt like a paper cut, barely noticeable individually, but collectively leaving me feeling raw and diminished. The venue selection became our first real battleground. I had spent days researching locations, creating detailed comparison charts with pricing, capacity, and amenities. When I excitedly presented my findings to David over breakfast, expecting his usual appreciation for my thoroughness, he barely glanced at my carefully organized folders. "Just pick something reasonable and book it," he said, without looking up from his tablet. "You're overthinking this, Maggie. But don't you want to see the options? The Fairmont has that beautiful garden terrace. You always... Whatever you think is best," he interrupted, his tone suggesting the conversation was over. "You handle the emotional stuff. I'll focus on the real logistics." The emotional stuff. As if my months of research and planning were somehow less valuable than his real contributions. I felt something cold settle in my chest, but I pushed it aside. David was under pressure at work, I told myself. He trusted my judgment, but the pattern continued. When I suggested we meet with the caterer together to discuss menu options, David declined. "That's more your area of expertise," he said. When the florist called to schedule a consultation with both parents, David told me to handle it alone. "Just don't go overboard," he warned. "Remember, we're not trying to impress anyone." The morning I went wedding dress shopping with Sarah was particularly painful. I had been looking forward to this mother-daughter moment for months, imagining how we'd laugh and cry together as Sarah tried on gowns. But 20 minutes into our appointment at the bridal boutique, David called my phone. "How much longer is this dress thing going to take?" he asked without preamble when I answered. "We just started looking, honey. Sarah's only tried on 3. Stop wasting money on emotional nonsense." His voice was sharp enough that Sarah looked up from the fitting room with concern. "Just pick something and be done with it. We have actual decisions to make." I felt my cheeks burn with embarrassment as the bridal consultant pretended not to hear. Sarah emerged in a stunning silk gown, her eyes bright with excitement, and I had to force enthusiasm into my voice while David's criticism still rang in my ears. "You look beautiful, sweetheart," I managed. But something in my tone must have betrayed my hurt because Sarah's smile faltered. "Mom, are you okay?" "Of course," I lied, ending David's call without another word. "This is your day. Let's focus on finding your perfect dress." The erosion continued in smaller, more subtle ways. When I tried to share exciting updates about the wedding flowers or discuss seating arrangements, David would respond with practical concerns about costs or logistics, stripping the joy from every conversation. My enthusiasm began to feel foolish, childish even. "Do you really think we need so many flowers?" he questioned when I showed him the florist's preliminary designs. "It's like you're trying to bankrupt us for one day." "I thought you wanted Sarah to have a beautiful wedding," I replied, hearing the defensiveness creep into my voice. "I want her to have a sensible wedding," he corrected. "Beauty doesn't require excess, Maggie." Slowly, I began censoring myself, sharing fewer details, asking for his opinion less frequently. It seemed easier than facing his criticism or disinterest. But with each conversation I avoided, each decision I made alone, I felt myself becoming invisible in my own daughter's wedding planning. By March, I realized I had stopped expecting David's support altogether. I was planning our daughter's wedding like a single parent, managing every detail while pretending everything was normal. The woman who had once been David's trusted partner had somehow become just another wedding vendor, useful but ultimately disposable. The rehearsal dinner was supposed to be our moment to shine as Sarah's parents, but it became the night I realized how completely David had stopped seeing me as his equal partner. The event was held at the elegant Fairmont Olympic Hotel in the same ballroom where David's firm had celebrated major victories over the years. I had spent weeks coordinating every detail, the menu, the seating arrangements, the timeline of toasts, wanting everything to be perfect for our daughter and the gathered family and friends. As the evening progressed beautifully, I felt a surge of pride. Sarah looked radiant in her rehearsal dress. Bobby's family was charming, and even David's typically critical mother, Eleanor, seemed pleased with the arrangements. When dinner concluded and the toast began, I felt confident and grateful. This was what I had been working toward for months, a celebration worthy of our daughter. When Bobby's father finished his warm welcome to Sarah, and Sarah's maid of honor completed her funny, heartfelt tribute, I stood up with my carefully prepared remarks. I had practiced my toast for weeks, wanting to strike the perfect balance between sentiment and humor, between honoring our family's past and celebrating Sarah's future. "Thank you all for being here tonight," I began, my voice steady and warm. Watching Sarah grow from a little girl who insisted on wearing her princess dress to the grocery store into the confident, successful woman she is today has been one of life's greatest joys. I could see Sarah beaming at me from the head table, and several guests were already reaching for tissues. I continued, sharing a few cherished memories about Sarah's childhood, her determination, her kindness. The room was attentive, engaged, and I felt that familiar rush of connection I used to experience in my teaching days. "Sarah's always had this gift for bringing people together," I was saying, gesturing toward the mix of families and friends filling the room. She sees the best in everyone and somehow makes each person feel like they're the most important. Honey, you're rambling. David's voice cut through the warm atmosphere like a cold wind. The entire room fell silent. I stopped mid-sentence, my heart lurching as every head turned toward my husband. He was standing now, his expression a mixture of impatience and what looked almost like embarrassment. "Let's keep this moving," he continued, his tone suggesting, "I was an overexcited amateur who needed professional management. People want to enjoy their evening." The silence stretched endlessly. I could feel my face burning with humiliation as 90 pairs of eyes witnessed my husband publicly diminishing me. Sarah's face had gone white with shock, and Bobby looked like he wanted to disappear into the floor. Eleanor wore a barely concealed smirk, as if this confirmed everything she'd always suspected about my inadequacy. "Of course," I managed, my voice barely above a whisper. I sat down quickly, my prepared conclusion about Sarah's bright future dying in my throat. "David, please continue." Without missing a beat, David launched into his own toast, polished, professional, perfectly timed. He spoke eloquently about building strong foundations in marriage and the architectural principles of lasting love. His metaphors were clever, his delivery flawless, and when he finished, the room erupted in appreciative applause. As guests came forward to congratulate us both afterward, I smiled and accepted their compliments about the lovely evening while dying inside. Several people mentioned how lucky I was to have such a take-charge husband who knew how to keep things on track. Later, back in our hotel room, I finally confronted him. "David, how could you embarrass me like that in front of everyone?" He was already removing his cufflinks, his expression coolly indifferent. "You were going on too long, Maggie. Someone had to save you from yourself." "Save me?" "I was sharing memories of our daughter." "You were rambling sentimentally. People were getting restless." He hung his suit jacket with his usual precision. "Look, you handled the logistics beautifully tonight. Stick to what you're good at." That phrase, "stick to what you're good at," hit me like a physical blow. When had my husband started viewing me as someone with such limited capabilities? When had the woman he once called his brilliant partner become someone who needed to be managed and corrected? As I lay awake that night, I realized David no longer saw me as his equal. I had become just another element in his perfectly designed life. Useful when performing my designated function, but requiring intervention when I stepped outside those boundaries. The morning of Sarah's wedding dawned crisp and beautiful, with golden June sunlight streaming through the windows of the bridal suite at the Fairmont. I had arrived early, my arms full of carefully organized emergency kits, safety pins, tissues, breath mints, everything a mother anticipates her daughter might need on her wedding day. This was supposed to be our sacred time together, the culmination of months of planning and a lifetime of dreams. Sarah looked breathtaking as the makeup artist put the finishing touches on her look. Emma was bustling around helping with jewelry and shoes, and the photographer was capturing these precious getting-ready moments. I felt a surge of maternal pride and joy, thinking this was exactly how a wedding morning should feel. Intimate, celebratory, filled with love. Then David arrived. "Good morning, ladies," he announced, stepping into the suite with his usual commanding presence. He was already dressed in his perfectly tailored tuxedo, every detail immaculate. "How are we progressing on the timeline?" Within minutes, he had completely taken over. When I suggested adjusting Sarah's veil to catch the light better for photos, David stepped forward. "Actually, I think it looks perfect as is. We don't want to overthink these details." When I offered to help Sarah with her pearl necklace, the one that had belonged to my grandmother, David was already there with his steady hands. "I've got this handled, Maggie. Why don't you just focus on getting yourself ready?" I stood there, holding the delicate earrings I had planned to help Sarah put on, watching my husband efficiently manage what I had imagined would be our mother-daughter moment. The photographer continued clicking away, capturing David's attentive care while I remained awkwardly on the periphery. "Mom, could you help me with my lipstick?" Sarah asked, trying to include me. Before I could move, David intervened again. "The makeup artist should handle that. We wanted to look professional for the photos." He turned to me with that patient expression I had come to dread. "Maggie, you're making everyone nervous hovering like that. Please just step back and let the professionals work." The dismissal hit me like a slap. I wasn't hovering. I was trying to participate in my own daughter's wedding preparation. But as I looked around the room, I realized David had systematically positioned himself as the essential parent while reducing me to an anxious bystander who needed to be managed. "You know what?" I said quietly, setting down the jewelry I'd been holding. "You're absolutely right. I'll just step back." I retreated to a corner of the suite, sinking into an ornate chair that suddenly felt miles away from the action. From my new vantage point, I watched David orchestrate every detail with the same precision he brought to his architectural projects. He helped Sarah into her dress, adjusted her train, even offered gentle suggestions to the photographer about lighting and angles. Sarah kept glancing at me with confusion and concern, clearly sensing something was wrong, but unable to address it without disrupting her wedding morning. Emma shot worried looks between David and me, but David's efficiency made any intervention seem unnecessary. "Dad, shouldn't Mom be helping with this?" Sarah finally asked when David began arranging her bouquet. "Your mother has done so much already," David replied smoothly. "Let her relax and enjoy watching you get ready. This is her time to be proud, not stressed." But I wasn't relaxing. I was disappearing. The role I had anticipated playing, the nurturing mother helping her daughter prepare for the most important day of her life, had been systematically stripped away. I had become a guest at my own daughter's wedding preparations, watching from the sidelines as David claimed every meaningful moment. When it came time to leave for the church, David offered Sarah his arm, while I gathered my purse and followed behind, like a wedding attendee rather than the mother of the bride. As we walked through the hotel lobby, guests smiled and waved at the beautiful bride and her distinguished father. While I trailed along, invisible in my carefully chosen mother of the bride dress, I realized with devastating clarity that I had lost my place in my own family's most important moments. Standing in the quiet church garden just an hour before the ceremony, I felt more alone than I had ever felt in my 38 years of marriage. The June air was sweet with the scent of blooming roses, and I could hear the distant sounds of guests arriving and the wedding coordinator directing vendors. But all of it felt surreal, as if I were watching someone else's life unfold from behind glass. I had excused myself from the bridal suite after David's systematic takeover, claiming I needed fresh air. The truth was, I couldn't bear to watch him continue orchestrating Sarah's final preparations while I sat uselessly in the corner on my own daughter's wedding day. I had been reduced to a spectator in my carefully chosen navy dress and matching shoes, an outfit I had selected months ago when I still believed I would play a central role in this celebration. The irony wasn't lost on me that I was hiding in a garden at my daughter's wedding, fighting back tears that would ruin the makeup I had applied so carefully that morning. This was supposed to be one of the happiest days of my life. I had dreamed about this moment since Sarah was a little girl, playing dress-up in my old scarves and shoes. I had imagined helping her into her gown, sharing quiet mother-daughter wisdom, being an essential part of her transformation from daughter to bride. Instead, I felt like an intruder in my own family's celebration. The sound of footsteps on the garden path made me quickly wipe my eyes and compose myself. I turned, expecting to see the wedding coordinator or perhaps a guest looking for the restroom, but it was David. His expression was unreadable as he approached, and for a moment I thought he might apologize for his behavior that morning. "Maggie," he said quietly, glancing around to ensure we were alone. "I need to talk to you." There was something in his voice, an urgency, almost a tremor, that made me look at him more closely. His usually perfect composure seemed cracked around the edges. His hands were slightly unsteady as he reached into his inner jacket pocket and withdrew an ivory envelope with my name written across it in his precise handwriting. "I need you to do something for me," he continued, his voice barely above a whisper. "Take this envelope. Keep it safe." I stared at the envelope, confused by this strange moment in an already surreal day. "David, what is this? If it's some kind of speech or toast—" "No," he cut me off, pressing the envelope into my hands with surprising firmness. "Maggie, I need you to promise me something, and it's important. Don't open this until after I'm gone. Can you do that for me?" The words sent a chill through me that had nothing to do with the garden's shade. "Gone? What do you mean, gone? David, you're scaring me." His eyes, when he looked directly at me, held an intensity and a sadness I had never seen before. For just a moment, the controlling, dismissive man from the past months disappeared, and I glimpsed something raw and desperate underneath. "Just promise me," he said urgently. "Not until I'm gone. Promise me, Maggie." "I promise," I whispered, though every instinct told me to demand an explanation. "But David, what's wrong? Why are you talking like this?" Before he could answer, the wedding coordinator appeared at the garden entrance. "Mr. and Mrs. Chen, we're ready for the family photos before the ceremony begins." David immediately straightened, his mask of composure sliding back into place as if our strange conversation had never happened. "Of course, we'll be right there." As we walked back toward the church together, I clutched the mysterious envelope in my trembling hands, my mind spinning with questions. But David had already shifted back into his role as the distinguished father of the bride, offering his arm to escort me as if the past few minutes hadn't shattered something fundamental in my understanding of our relationship. Throughout the ceremony that followed, as I watched Sarah marry Bobby in the beautiful sanctuary filled with flowers I had chosen and guests I had invited, I kept thinking about David's haunted expression and his inexplicable request. The envelope felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds in my small purse. I had no idea that I was carrying the key to understanding everything that had gone wrong between us. 3 months after David's funeral, the ivory envelope had haunted me from its place in my jewelry box like an accusation. Every time I opened the box to choose earrings or my wedding ring, there it sat. David's precise handwriting spelled out my name with the same careful attention he brought to architectural blueprints. Some nights I would take it out and hold it, running my fingers over the paper, wondering what final words my husband had felt compelled to leave me. The grief counselor had suggested I wait until I felt emotionally ready, but I was beginning to wonder if such a moment would ever come. The house felt impossibly empty without David's presence, without his morning coffee routine and evening news commentary. Sarah called daily. Emma visited when her residency schedule allowed, but the silence between their check-ins was deafening. It was a rainy Thursday night in September when I finally found the courage. I had been sorting through David's closet, boxing up his clothes for donation, when the familiar scent of his cologne on his sweater broke down the careful composure I had maintained since the funeral. Suddenly, I was sobbing into his shirts, missing him desperately, despite the months of emotional distance that had preceded his death. With tears still wet on my cheeks, I retrieved the envelope from my jewelry box and sat on our bed, my bed now, with shaking hands. The paper felt fragile, as if it might disintegrate before I could discover its secrets. I slipped my finger under the seal, and it opened with a soft whisper that seemed to echo through the quiet room. Inside were several folded documents and a single sheet of David's personal stationery, the heavy cream paper he used for important correspondence. My heart hammered as I unfolded the letter, and the first line made my breath catch in my throat. "My dearest Maggie, by the time you read this, you'll know that I'm gone." I had to stop reading, my vision blurring with fresh tears. David had written this, knowing he was going to die. The realization hit me like a physical blow. My husband had been living with some terrible knowledge while I had been focused on wedding details and feeling sorry for myself. With trembling hands, I continued, "I've been hiding a terrible secret from you, and I pray that someday you'll understand why. 5 years ago, I was diagnosed with early-stage Alzheimer's disease. The doctors gave me a timeline of 7 to 10 years before significant decline, but I've been experiencing symptoms for the past 18 months that suggest the progression is faster than expected." The letter fluttered from my hands as if it had burned me. Alzheimer's, 5 years. I sat in stunned silence, trying to process this revelation. David had been sick, seriously, progressively sick, and he had hidden it from me completely. The man who once shared every detail of his day, every work frustration, and triumph, had been carrying this devastating diagnosis alone. I picked up the letter again, my hands now steady with shock. "I've been losing pieces of myself slowly, and I was terrified that you would become my caregiver instead of my wife. I've watched that disease steal the dignity and identity from too many good people, and I couldn't bear the thought of you watching me disappear piece by piece. The cruel distance I created between us, especially during Sarah's wedding, was my attempt to prepare you for a life without me, to make my absence feel like relief rather than devastating loss." His dismissive behavior, the way he had systematically pushed me aside, taken over every detail while making me feel incompetent and unwanted. It hadn't been cruelty. It had been a desperate man's attempt to protect me from becoming his caregiver, to preserve my independence while he still had the cognitive ability to plan for my future. My hand shook as I reached for the additional documents he had included, insurance policies I knew nothing about, investment accounts in my name, detailed financial arrangements that would ensure my security. At the bottom of the stack was a business card for Dr. Jennifer Martinez, neurologist, with a handwritten note. "She can answer your medical questions if you need them answered." David hadn't just been preparing to die. He had been preparing me to live without him. I spent the rest of that night sitting on our bedroom floor, surrounded by the documents David had left me, trying to piece together the elaborate deception he had orchestrated out of love. Each paper told a different part of the story I had been too blind to see, and with every revelation, my understanding of the past 2 years shifted completely. The insurance policies were dated 3 years ago, substantial life insurance coverage I had no knowledge of, with premiums that must have strained our budget. Yet David had never mentioned financial pressure, never asked me to cut back on household expenses or wedding costs. He had quietly sacrificed to ensure I would be financially secure after his death. A folder marked legal documents contained powers of attorney, updated wills, and detailed instructions for managing our assets. Everything was meticulously organized, explained in David's careful handwriting as if he were guiding me through a complex architectural project. He'd spent months, maybe years, preparing for a future where I would have to navigate alone. But it was the medical folder that broke my heart completely. Appointment cards dating back 5 years for Dr. Martinez, the neurologist, copies of cognitive assessments that showed a gradual decline in memory and executive function. Research articles about early-onset Alzheimer's, many with David's annotations in the margins, questions about progression rates, treatment options, and prognosis. One article was heavily marked up, titled, "Protecting Family Members from Caregiver Burden." David had circled entire paragraphs about the emotional and physical toll of caring for someone with dementia, and in the margin, he had written in his increasingly shaky handwriting, "Maggie deserves better than watching me disappear." My phone rang, and I saw Dr. Martinez's number from the business card. With trembling fingers, I answered. "Mrs. Chen, this is Dr. Martinez. I've been expecting your call for some time now. David asked me to reach out if I didn't hear from you within 3 months of his passing. Doctor, I just found his letter tonight. I had no idea he was sick. How could I not have known?" Her voice was gentle but professional. Your husband was remarkably skilled at masking his symptoms, Mrs. Chen. It's actually quite common in the early stages, especially for someone as intelligent and organized as David. May I ask, did you notice any changes in his behavior during the past year or so? Suddenly, everything clicked into place. David's increasing need to control every detail of the wedding planning wasn't about being domineering. He was struggling with decision-making and cognitive flexibility. His dismissive attitude toward my ideas wasn't disrespect. He was probably having difficulty processing multiple options and felt safer shutting down discussions than admitting his confusion. The wedding, I whispered. He took over everything. I thought he was being controlling, but he was likely experiencing executive function decline. Dr. Martinez confirmed, when cognitive processing becomes difficult, many patients retreat into familiar patterns of control. Taking charge of concrete tasks feels safer than admitting uncertainty. The phone calls I had overheard, the mysterious conversations about timelines and arrangements. David had been coordinating with doctors, lawyers, and financial advisors, building a safety net for my future while his own was crumbling. Doctor? How long did he know? He suspected something was wrong several months before his official diagnosis. The progression was faster than we typically see, but David was determined to use whatever time he had to protect you. He spoke of you constantly during our appointments, your kindness, your sacrifices for his career, his fear that he had taken too much from you already. As I hung up the phone, I realized that every cruel word, every dismissive gesture, every moment I had felt erased and invisible had been David's desperate attempt to love me in the only way his deteriorating mind could manage. He had been dying twice, once from the Alzheimer's that was stealing his cognitive abilities, and again from the isolation he had imposed on himself to protect me from witnessing his decline. For the first time since his funeral, I wasn't crying from grief or confusion. I was crying from a profound, overwhelming understanding of just how deeply my husband had loved me. Even as his capacity to show it was slipping away, the woman who had felt invisible for months was finally beginning to see clearly. In the weeks following my discovery of David's letter, something fundamental shifted inside me. The financial security he had provided wasn't just about money, it was about choice. For the first time in nearly 4 decades, I had the freedom to rediscover who Maggie Chen was beneath the layers of wife, mother, and corporate hostess I had worn for so long. I started small, almost secretively, as if David might somehow disapprove from wherever he was now. The first thing I did was walk into our home office, his domain for 38 years, and sit in his leather chair. The room still smelled faintly of his cologne and the coffee he used to drink while working late into the night. Instead of feeling like an intruder, I felt like I was reclaiming space that had always partially belonged to me. I spent hours in that chair researching what had happened to the teaching profession during my decades-long absence. Education had evolved dramatically. Technology had transformed classrooms. Teaching methods had advanced, and there were new approaches to literacy that fascinated me. Rather than feeling intimidated by how much had changed, I felt energized by the possibility of learning again. My first concrete step was enrolling in online courses through the University of Washington's continuing education program. Modern. Classroom technology and adult learning theory seemed like good starting points. I told no one about these courses, not even my daughters. There was something powerful about pursuing knowledge purely for myself without needing to justify or explain my choices to anyone. As I studied, I began to remember why I had loved teaching in the first place. It wasn't just about imparting knowledge, it was about witnessing transformation, about helping someone discover they were capable of more than they believed possible. I had forgotten that version of myself, the woman who could inspire confidence in struggling students and create order from classroom chaos. My next quiet revolution was in my appearance. David had always preferred me in subtle colors, navy, beige, soft pastels that complemented his preference for understated elegance. But browsing through a department store one afternoon, I found myself drawn to a vibrant emerald green blouse that made my eyes look bright and alive. I bought it impulsively, along with a burgundy scarf that David would have called too bold. When I wore the green blouse to lunch with my neighbor Janet, she did a double take. "Maggie, that color is stunning on you. I've never seen you in anything so vibrant." "I'm trying some new things," I replied simply. But her reaction made me realize how carefully I had been curating my appearance to match David's aesthetic preferences rather than my own. The house, too, began to reflect my emerging independence. I started with small changes, moving furniture to create better conversation spaces, adding throw pillows and colors that pleased me, and replacing David's stark architectural photography with warmer landscape prints. Each change felt like a small act of rebellion and reclamation. Most significantly, I began volunteering at the Rainier Valley Literacy Center, a nonprofit organization that served adult learners who were working to improve their reading and writing skills. Many of the students were immigrants learning English, older adults who had dropped out of school young, or people who simply needed to strengthen their skills for job advancement. The first time I walked into their modest building and met with the program coordinator, Maria Santos, I felt a spark I hadn't experienced in years. "We desperately need volunteers with teaching experience," Maria explained as she showed me around the center. "Our students are motivated and grateful, but they need patient, skilled instructors." "I haven't taught in almost 40 years, I admitted. "The passion never really goes away," Maria said with a knowing smile. "Would you be interested in shadowing one of our current volunteers just to see if it feels right?" As I watched experienced volunteers working with their students, helping a grandmother learn to read bedtime stories to her grandchildren, and assisting a factory worker with job application writing, I felt pieces of my old self clicking back into place. I wasn't becoming someone new. I was remembering who I had always been underneath. By December, the changes in me had become impossible to ignore, though I hadn't announced them to anyone. People began responding to me differently, as if they sensed some fundamental shift in my energy and confidence. The woman who had spent months feeling invisible was suddenly being seen with new clarity and respect. The first test came when David's former business partners, Harrison and Associates, requested a meeting about purchasing Chen Design Group. I had expected this. David's architectural firm was his life's work, but without him, the remaining partners needed to consolidate or sell. What they hadn't expected was the composed, prepared woman who walked into their conference room that Tuesday morning. "Mrs. Chen," Richard Harrison began with the patronizing tone he had always used with wives at company functions, "we know this must be overwhelming for you. We're prepared to make this transition as simple as possible." He slid a folder across the polished conference table. "This is a very fair offer for David's stake in the firm. We've structured it so you'll receive payments over 5 years, which should provide steady income without you having to worry about the complexities of running a business." I opened the folder and reviewed their proposal with the same methodical attention David had taught me to apply to any important document. The offer was indeed fair by standard metrics, but I had spent weeks researching the firm's recent projects, client base, and market position. David's meticulous files had given me insights these men assumed I couldn't possibly understand. "Gentlemen," I said calmly, closing the folder, "I appreciate your concern for my financial security. However, I'll need time to review all my options with my financial advisor before making any decisions." The surprise on their faces was almost comical. Richard exchanged glances with his partners. "Mrs. Chen, with respect, managing architectural firm ownership requires expertise that David spent 38 years sharing with me." I interrupted smoothly. "I'm familiar with the firm's portfolio, client relationships, and growth potential. I'm not in any hurry to make decisions about my husband's legacy." The power dynamic in the room shifted palpably. These men had expected a grieving widow eager to simplify her life by accepting their convenient offer. Instead, they found themselves facing someone who understood business negotiations and wasn't intimidated by their expertise. The second shift occurred during my monthly dinner with Eleanor, David's mother, who had always treated me like an inadequate addition to her son's otherwise perfect life. We met at her favorite restaurant, where she typically held court, dispensing criticism disguised as helpful advice. "Margaret," she began, using the formal name she preferred despite my 38 years of being called Maggie. "I've been thinking about your situation. A woman your age alone in that big house. It's not practical. I know a lovely senior living community where you could make appropriate friends." 6 months ago, this suggestion would have sent me into a spiral of self-doubt. Instead, I set down my fork and looked directly at Eleanor with genuine curiosity. "Eleanor, David trusted me with everything, his business decisions, our family's future, our daughter's guidance. Perhaps you should trust his judgment about my capabilities." Her fork paused halfway to her mouth. For 40 years, I had absorbed her subtle criticisms about my cooking, my decorating choices, my parenting style. She'd never seen me stand my ground with such quiet confidence. "Well, I just thought, I appreciate your concern," I continued, my voice warm but firm. "But I'm quite content with my choices. In fact, I'm returning to work soon. The Literacy Center has offered me a position teaching adult learners." Eleanor's expression cycled through surprise, skepticism, and finally grudging respect. "You're going back to work at your age?" David encouraged me to pursue my passions. When I was ready. I'm ready now. For the first time in our relationship, Eleanor seemed to see me as David's equal partner rather than his dependent wife. The shift was subtle, but unmistakable. She began asking about my work instead of offering unsolicited advice about my life choices. My daughters noticed the change too. During our weekly phone calls, Sarah commented, "Mom, you sound different lately, stronger somehow." "I'm remembering who I used to be," I replied honestly. The woman who had been pushed aside and silenced was finding her voice again, and people were listening. 6 months after David's death, I realized it was time for my daughters to understand the truth about their father's final months and his devastating diagnosis. Sarah and Emma had both been struggling with anger and confusion about David's behavior during the wedding planning, unable to reconcile the controlling, dismissive man from those final months with the loving father they had always known. I invited them both for Sunday dinner at the house, preparing David's favorite lasagna recipe in the dining room where we had shared countless family meals. As we sat around the familiar table, I could see the questions in their eyes. The same questions that had tormented me for months before I discovered David's letter. "Girls," I began, my voice steady despite the weight of what I was about to share. "There's something important you need to know about your father. Something he made me promise to keep secret until after he was gone." Sarah set down her fork, immediately alert to the seriousness in my tone. "Mom, what is it? You've seemed different lately, and we've been worried." Emma leaned forward, her medical training probably already preparing her for bad news. "Is this about Dad's heart attack? Was there something the doctors missed?" I took a deep breath and pulled out David's letter, which I had carried with me for weeks, along with copies of his medical records that Dr. Martinez had provided with my permission. "Your father didn't die from just a heart attack. He had been living with early-stage Alzheimer's disease for 5 years. He hid his diagnosis from all of us." The silence that followed was deafening. Sarah's face went white, and Emma's medical knowledge immediately kicked in as she reached for the documents with shaking hands. 5 years? Sarah whispered. "He was sick during my entire engagement, during the wedding planning?" "Yes," I confirmed gently. "And that explains everything about his behavior during those months. The way he took over every decision, dismissed my input, seemed so controlling and unlike himself." "He wasn't becoming cruel, sweetheart. He was terrified and trying to protect us all in the only way his deteriorating mind knew how." Emma was scanning the medical records, her professional training helping her process the information. "Mom, these cognitive assessments show significant decline in executive function and decision-making ability. He would have been struggling with complex planning and multi-step processes, which is exactly what wedding planning requires," I added. When I tried to discuss options or share ideas, it probably felt overwhelming to him. Taking complete control was his way of managing tasks he could no longer handle collaboratively. Sarah began crying, the anger she had carried for months dissolving into heartbreak. "I was so mad at him, Mom. I thought he was being a control freak, undermining you, making you feel small. I even told Bobby that Dad was showing his true colors under stress." "Your father was showing his true colors," I said firmly. "His love for us, his determination to protect us, his willingness to be the villain rather than burden us with watching him disappear. He sacrificed our understanding to preserve our independence." I explained David's elaborate financial planning, the insurance policies, the legal arrangements he had made to ensure my security. "He spent his final years preparing for a future where you girls would have your own lives, and I would need to rediscover mine. He didn't want any of us to become his caregivers?" Emma shook her head in amazement. "The heart attack was probably brought on by the stress of hiding this secret, managing everything alone while his cognitive abilities declined. But I've also realized something else," I continued. "While your father's illness explains his behavior, it also forced me to confront how much of myself I had lost over the years. I had become so dependent on his approval, so focused on being the perfect wife, that I forgot who I was underneath." Sarah looked up through her tears. "Is that why you seem so different now? So much more yourself? Your father's final gift wasn't just financial security," I explained. "It was forcing me to rediscover my independence, my capabilities, my own voice. He couldn't tell me that directly because of his condition, but he created circumstances that would require me to find my strength again." Emma reached across the table to squeeze my hand. "Mom, we're so sorry. We should have seen that you were struggling too." "You were both starting your own lives," I replied. "That's exactly what your father and I wanted. But now you understand why I'm going back to teaching, why I'm making changes to the house, why I seem different. I'm not just grieving your father. I'm discovering who Maggie Chen is when she's not defined by being David's wife." For the first time since David's death, we sat together as a family, united by understanding, rather than divided by confusion and unspoken resentment. 2 weeks after, my conversation with the girls, Maria Santos from the Rainier Valley Literacy Center, called with news that would reveal the final layer of David's carefully orchestrated plan for my future. "Maggie, I have something wonderful to share with you." Maria's voice was bright with excitement. "The board has approved our proposal to expand the adult literacy program, and we'd like to offer you the position of lead adult learning coordinator. It's a full-time position with benefits, and honestly, you're the perfect candidate." I was sitting in David's old office where I'd been working on lesson plans for my volunteer tutoring sessions. The irony of receiving this career opportunity in the space where David had built his own professional legacy wasn't lost on me. "Maria, I'm honored, but I have to ask, why me? I know there are candidates with more recent experience." There was a pause on the other end of the line. "Actually, Maggie, there's something I need to tell you. Something I probably should have mentioned when you first started volunteering with us." My heart began to race with a familiar sensation, the feeling that another piece of David's puzzle was about to fall into place. 2 years ago, we received the largest donation in our organization's history. It came from an anonymous benefactor, who specifically requested that if a woman named Margaret Chen ever applied for a volunteer or staff position, we should give her every consideration. The donor said she was, and I quote, "the most gifted educator he had ever known." But she had given up her career to support her family. The room seemed to tilt around me, anonymous benefactor. The donation came through a law firm, Patterson, Wells and Associates. When I called to thank them and ask about the donor's identity, the attorney would only say that the benefactor wished to remain anonymous, but wanted to ensure our organization could provide opportunities for passionate educators who might be returning to the field. Patterson Wells and Associates, David's law firm. I remembered seeing their letterhead among the documents in his carefully organized files. "Maria," I said carefully, "how much was this donation?" $250,000. It allowed us to expand our programs, hire additional staff, and create the position we're now offering you. Without that donation, we wouldn't be able to offer you a full-time role with the salary and benefits you deserve. I sat in stunned silence, staring at David's desk, where his architectural tools still lay exactly as he had left them. Even in his cognitive decline, even while struggling with the progressive symptoms of Alzheimer's, my husband had been thinking steps ahead, creating opportunities for my future that I couldn't even imagine. "Mrs. Chen, are you still there?" "Yes, I'm here." "Maria, I need to ask you something else. Did this anonymous donor leave any other instructions?" "Actually, yes. He requested that when we made an offer to Margaret Chen, we should tell her that the best teachers never really retire, they just find new students who need them." Those words hit me like a lightning bolt. It was something David used to say to me in the early years of our marriage when I would talk wistfully about the classroom I had left behind. He would tell me that I was still teaching our daughters, teaching the young wives in his company's social circle, teaching by example through my volunteer work. "He also left a sealed letter to be given to you if you accepted the position," Maria continued. "Should I prepare the paperwork for your acceptance?" "Yes," I said without hesitation, tears streaming down my face. "Yes, I accept." The next morning, I sat in the Literacy Center's small office, holding the second letter David had arranged for me to receive. This one was shorter, written in the shaky handwriting that must have reflected his advancing condition. "My dearest Maggie, if you're reading this, it means you found your way back to the classroom where you belong. I'm sorry I couldn't tell you directly how proud I was of your sacrifice, how much I regretted asking you to give up teaching, and how desperately I wanted to give you the chance to return to what made you happiest. You gave me 38 years of supporting my dreams. This is my gift to support yours. Teach them well, my love. You always did." David's final act of love wasn't just protecting me from his decline. It was ensuring I would have a purpose, a career, and a future that honored both my sacrifices and my dreams. 3 months into my new position at the Literacy Center, I was grading evening class assignments in my small office when I heard a familiar knock on the door. I looked up to see Sarah standing in the doorway, still wearing her business suit from work. Her expression was a mixture of pride and something that looked almost like awe. "I hope I'm not interrupting," she said softly, stepping into the modest space that had become my professional sanctuary. I wanted to see where my mother had been spending her days. Sarah's eyes took in the cheerful bulletin board covered with student success stories, the small bookshelf filled with literacy resources, and the desk where I had been reviewing essays written by adult learners working toward their GED certificates. On the wall hung my new teaching certificate alongside a photo of my current class, 15 diverse faces representing ages from 19 to 73, all united by their determination to improve their reading and writing skills. "Mom, this is incredible," Sarah said, settling into the chair across from my desk. "Maria Santos told me about your work here when I called to arrange this visit. She said you've become their most effective instructor." I set down my red pen and really looked at my daughter, noting the way she was studying me with something approaching surprise. "Sarah, what brings you here today? Is everything okay?" "I owe you an apology," she said directly, her voice carrying the confidence she had inherited from both David and me. "Actually, I owe you several apologies, but this one is the most important." She paused, gathering her thoughts, and I could see her choosing her words carefully, a trait that reminded me so much of her father. During my wedding planning, I was so focused on having everything perfect that I didn't see what was happening to you. Dad was pushing you aside, taking over every decision, and I just let it happen. I was so caught up in being the bride that I forgot you were my mother, trying to share in one of the most important moments of our family's life. I started to speak, but Sarah held up her hand, clearly needing to finish her thoughts. But it's more than that, Mom. For years, maybe my whole adult life, I've seen you as Dad's wife first and my mother second. I never really thought about who you were before you became our family's support system. I never asked about your dreams, your career, or what you had given up for us. Her voice grew stronger, more determined. When I see you here in your element, working with these students who clearly adore you, I'm finally seeing the woman you were before you became our family's foundation, and I'm angry at myself for not seeing her sooner. I felt tears prick my eyes, but they were tears of gratitude rather than sadness. Sarah, you were living your life exactly as your father and I hoped you would. Independent, successful, focused, on building your own future. We didn't want you to carry the weight of our choices, but I should have stood up for you during the wedding planning, she insisted. When Dad dismissed your toast at the rehearsal dinner, when he took over all the decisions you had been working on for months, I should have said something. I should have recognized that wasn't the father I knew, and I should have protected you. Sarah leaned forward, her expression earnest. But watching you now, seeing how you've rebuilt your life and career, I realize you didn't need my protection. You needed the space to remember your own strength, and somehow, despite everything, Dad gave you that. Your father's illness forced all of us to find new versions of ourselves, I replied thoughtfully. You and Emma learned to see me as a complete person, rather than just your mother. I learned that I could be independent again, and David learned that sometimes the greatest act of love is letting go, even when it looks like abandonment. Sarah nodded, tears in her eyes. I want to know this version of you better, Mom. Not just the mother who supported our dreams, but the teacher, the professional, the woman who has her own ambitions and passions. Will you tell me about your work here, about your students? For the next hour, I shared stories about Maria, the 70-year-old grandmother learning to read so she could help her grandchildren with homework, and Carlos, the factory worker improving his English to qualify for a supervisory position. I told her about the profound joy of witnessing adults discover their own capabilities, the same joy I had felt in elementary classrooms decades ago. You're glowing when you talk about this work, Sarah observed. I don't think I've ever seen you this energized, this fully yourself. I'm finally living for myself again, I admitted, while still honoring the family we built together. As Sarah prepared to leave, she hugged me tightly. I'm proud of you, Mom, not just as your daughter, but as one woman appreciating another woman's courage to start over. For the first time, Sarah was seeing me not as an extension of her father or a support system for her own life, but as Maggie Chen, educator, professional, and woman of substance in my own right. 1 year after David's death, I stood in the living room of our home, my home now, preparing for a small gathering to celebrate my first year back in the classroom. The space looked dramatically different from the formal showcase it had been during David's lifetime. The stark white walls now displayed colorful artwork created by my adult literacy students, and the rigid furniture arrangements had been replaced with comfortable seating that invited conversation rather than admiration. In my hands, I held 2 photographs that told the complete story of my transformation. The first was from Sarah's wedding day, David and me standing together during the family portraits, both of us smiling for the camera. To anyone else, we looked like the perfect couple, celebrating our daughter's happiness. But I could now see what I had missed then: the tension in my shoulders, the forced quality of my smile, and the distance in David's eyes that I had attributed to wedding stress, but now understood as the fear of a man losing himself to an unforgiving disease. The second photograph had been taken just last week at the Literacy Center's annual celebration. I stood surrounded by my students, their faces glowing with pride as they held their certificates of completion. My smile in this picture was radiant and unguarded. My posture was confident and relaxed. This was the face of a woman who had found her purpose again, who had remembered what it felt like to make a meaningful difference in the world. Setting the wedding photo on the mantel next to the classroom picture, I marveled at how two images could capture such a complete transformation. The woman in the wedding photo had been slowly disappearing, erasing herself to accommodate her husband's increasing need for control. The woman in the classroom photo had been reborn through necessity, loss, and ultimately love. Sarah arrived, first carrying a bouquet of flowers, followed closely by Emma, who had driven down from Seattle after finishing her hospital shift. Both of my daughters had evolved in their understanding of who I was, and their relationships with me had deepened as they learned to see me as a complete person rather than simply their mother. "Mom, the house looks amazing," Emma said, taking in the warm, lived-in atmosphere that had replaced David's architectural precision. "It feels like you now." Maria Santos arrived with several of my students, followed by a few colleagues from the Literacy Center. As I watched these disparate groups mingle in my living room, my daughters talking animatedly with Carlos about his plans to attend community college, Maria sharing teaching strategies with a woman who had become my closest friend, I realized I had created something David and I had never quite achieved in our entertaining days. This wasn't a performance or a showcase. It was a genuine celebration of community and connection. As the evening progressed and stories were shared about student successes and family milestones, I found myself thinking about David's final letter and the incredible complexity of his love for me. His decision to push me away during his illness, while devastating in the moment, had forced me to rediscover my independence and strength. His secret financial arrangements had given me the freedom to choose my own path rather than being driven by economic necessity. His anonymous donation to the Literacy Center had opened a door to the career fulfillment I thought I had permanently sacrificed. David was right about one thing I had written in my journal that morning, reflecting on the year that had passed. Love sometimes means making the hardest choices. He chose to let me go so I could find myself. Now I choose to honor both the woman I was and the woman I'm becoming. As my guests prepared to leave, I stood again in front of the two photographs, understanding finally that both women were me, the devoted wife who had sacrificed her career for love and the passionate educator who had found her way back to her calling. David's envelope hadn't just contained his secret, it had contained my freedom. And for that profound, complicated, heartbreaking gift, I would always be grateful. Sometimes the greatest act of love isn't holding on. It's knowing when to let go, even when it breaks your heart. David's diagnosis could have destroyed us both. But instead, his courage in facing it alone gave me the chance to discover that I was stronger, more capable, and more resilient than either of us had ever imagined. I was finally completely authentically myself again.